Welcome to Hip Hop Now Podcast. If you're from the future, you know what to do. Get your ass out of here. Don't disrespect the legend. Hip hop is here to stay. Let's get right into the business. What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas, and this is Hip Hop Now Podcast, a podcast specifically designed to keep you caught up on all things hip hop, music, and culture that happened throughout the week. I am your host, Vegas, and it is homecoming season. In particular, homecoming for the national treasure, Morgan State University, you know what I'm saying, which I am an alumni of. Shout out to all the graduates, all the current undergrad students, whatever your relationship is. For those who don't know, Morgan State University is a historically Black, once college, but now university, HBCU, located in Baltimore, Maryland. I attended the school. Little backstory on that coming up real quick. But first and foremost, I want to shout out, because we don't have them on the screen right now. I want to shout out the Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/hiphopnow, past and present, for supporting this podcast, coming up with ideas for the show, playing a role. And also, they got to see this episode, see and hear, right? Because you're going to use both. This episode in advance of its airing. And that's just one of the perks you can get being a Patreon supporter of this podcast. So if you are so inclined to become a part, or just interested in knowing, okay, well, what you got, visit the link in the description of this episode, patreon.com/hiphopnow. You don't even have to type that in. Just click the link. Take you right there. Okay. Take you right there. Also, really quick, for those who don't know, I do have a book, so to speak, out on Substack. 5 chapters of my experience with hip hop. It's called Experience Hip Hop, and it's really about my journey through purchasing classic albums and what I was doing at the time, the context of where we were, dating from the 80s to the 90s to the 2000s and all of that. 5 chapters up. Albums covered have been Death Certificate, Low End Theory by Tribe Called Quest. Well, let me say this because some people don't know, right? Death Certificate by Ice Cube, Tribe Called Quest, Low End Theory, Wu-Tang's Into the Wu, right? What else did I do? I'm starting to forget now. Nas' Illmatic. And the 5th one, I think, is one we're going to talk about. So I'm not going to really say anything. But if you're interested, all you got to do is follow me anywhere on social media at Vegas World INC. I have posted the links, whether you're on Twitter, whether you're on something like Blue Sky or on Instagram. I have a Facebook page for Hip Hop Now Podcast. All kinds of content coming at your frame every damn week for free. So follow a brother on social media at Vegas World INC. And now, let's get into the business. So if you don't know, this last public service announcement. If you're listening on audio or you're watching this for the first time on YouTube, subscribe to the podcast. We're trying to get to 500 subscribers on YouTube. We're almost there. Check it out. Links are everywhere. Bars. Now, let's get into the business. 1995. So in 1995, I graduated from Boys and Girls High School on Fulton Street in Brooklyn, New York, Bedford-Stuyvesant area, where I was born and raised. If you can't tell, you know, by the Brother Swag albums I put out, hat, all of that. You know what I'm saying? I am from New York. Yes, you guessed correctly. And I attended Morgan State University, which is located in Baltimore, Maryland, like I said, on a business scholarship, you know, that I won, along with some other loose scholarships here and there. Don't get excited. It wasn't a full ride. It was just a little bit of money. But I was appreciative. I was a marketing major entering the school of business, Earl Graves School of Business, by the way. And during that time, I wound up changing my major to media because I was more interested in doing something directly connected with music that was creative. Even though marketing and working in the music industry could have been the same thing, I kind of wanted to get much closer to the music than that. And I felt like radio and other content creation things was my lane, right? I wanted to create the content. I didn't really want to market the content, even though that's in my blood. And while at Morgan State, I was writing, I was rhyming. I had just started rhyming in like a year before. So now I'm about a year in with my pen. You know what I'm saying? I DJ'd before. I lived hip hop coming up as a kid in Brooklyn, New York. Also, my second home, Queensbridge. I spent a lot of weekends in Queensbridge. So my exposure to hip hop across New York City and everywhere I was, the radio, television, everything, all of that came with me to be more to Morgan State University, just to run into dudes who also rhyme, and some dudes, shout out to Clark, who had a like studio in the dorm room. And I was able to cut my first demo with them and just rhyming with dudes around me, my friends that rhymed and all that good stuff. And for those who watching who know, I was never a part of Black Diamond. You can book that. But some of y'all don't even know what I'm talking about. But those who know, y'all know. But with doing that, obviously, and being who I was as a hip hop fan, obviously, hip hop was huge around that time on campus. Not only us doing it, but just talking about everything that was out. And in 1995, a number of notable hip hop albums dropped, right? Some people's favorites, some albums that are classics, some follow-ups that are disappointments, some classic debuts. Like it was full of dope hip hop that was new. You know what I'm saying? Like, sure, you had other artists who like LL Cool J and Cool G Rap dropping albums, which kind of felt dope because those albums were dope, like Mr. Smith and like 456, I think was Cool G Rap album. But you also had debuts from like ODB and Goody Mob, and you had people like Master Ace continuing his legacy based off the Juice Crew, but doing something different. So there was just so much music dropping that was new and refreshing, along with some veterans who put out quality work. That's what's dope about it, right? You get the debut of Big L in the same year. You get an album by KRS-One that's dope, and Das Effects that's dope, right? So 1995 was a very interesting year in hip hop, and a formative year for me because I'm making a transition from being in high school and now trying to adjust to college, not only the curriculum, but also just the lifestyle being in college. Like, yo, we was partying every day. And when I say that, I am not lying. I think 1 or 2 weeks, me and the homie Woods, shout out to him, I think we went to a party every day. No lie. Like on a Tuesday, just random, it's about 17 people in here, but so what? Like, so it was a very different year, and it was before the shiny suit era kind of took off, right? Biggie and all of that had already popped. The Bad Boy had already popped. But one thing about 95 was boom bap reigned supreme, right? And lyrical content and original styles were probably more important than they had ever been in hip hop. It's part of the reason why you hear guys who just swear by the 90s, specifically maybe 93 to like 98 or something like that, right? There are people who, or even, you can even dial it back, maybe 96, but there are people who swear by that era of hip hop, and it has a lot to do with the production. It has a lot to do with a lot of newer artists, and it definitely has a lot to do with skills, pen game, lyricism, songwriting, all of that, like the attention to detail. If your pen game wasn't right, it didn't matter who did your beats. Group Home also dropped in 1995, their debut album, which to most is a classic off the beats alone. Honestly, literally off the beats alone, that DJ Premier produced the whole album. But that's what I mean. There was a lot going on in that year musically. So I decided on Morgan State University's homecoming to do my top 5 of 1995. Now, also along with that, before we get into the top 5, I'm going to give you 3 honorable mentions as well as a slept on. Now, let's start with the slept on. I think an album in 1995 that slept on, and I don't believe it was slept on back then. I just think when people think of a lot of albums from 1995 that were dope, this one almost never gets mentioned. And that's Onyx, All We Got Is Us. This was Onyx's sophomore album, and it was surprisingly dope and very different from their debut. Now, when I say surprisingly dope, what I mean is when Onyx dropped with their debut, they had the ball heads, and it was like a real style, and it was almost like a gimmick. You know what I'm saying? That we were into back then, because I think that came out like 93. We were into back then, but 95 was different because now you done had Wu-Tang debut, you done had Nas debut, you done had Biggie debut. So who's checking for that back then? That's how much music changed on the East Coast from Onyx's debut to their second album. And honestly, All We Got Is Us is an album that I think you should check out. If you know Onyx enough to be like, yeah, it was cool, but I never heard that. You should check it out. So my top 3 songs off of that album would be Last Days, the beat, the feeling, the vibe of that record, crazy. Purse Snatchers, again, kind of that Onyx flavor, but the production was so boom bap and hard hitting. And my third favorite is Walking New York. And it ain't really about nobody else because I don't care. I don't care where you're from. And I'm not trying to rep me being better than you. I don't care about that. What I liked about the record was it felt like New York. And prior to guys throwing gang signs in New York, hearing Fredro Starr saying, "We don't throw gang signs in New York," it was true. And it was dope the way they did it. Now, I'm not here to vouch for no gang members because I ain't one and never have, never will. Okay. I'm talking about current guys. They could do what they want to do. But back then, that was the distinction, or one of the distinctions between, New York streets and like Cali streets or whatever. I do like the answer from Dog Pound with Snoop. Off the Poetic Justice soundtrack, like throw your guns in the air, we don't care. Like dope stuff. So check it out. Now, honorable mentions. These are 3 albums that probably would have made my top 5. But for whatever reason, the top 5 I have is so solid to me that they had to go to honorable mentions. One being Smith & Wesson's The Shining. Straight up Brooklyn. You want Brooklyn, 1995, Timbs and hoodies. Like, this is it. Timbs and hood. This album smells like Timbs and hoodies and hallways and breaking up blunts. Now, I didn't hang out in no damn hallways breaking up blunts, but you know what I mean, right? Also, Bone Thugs and Harmony, 1999, Eternal. I'll say this, back when it dropped, I didn't have money to buy everything, but I heard songs I liked a lot from them. And I remember somebody let me hear their album back then, and I was like, oh, I get it now. I get why Eazy-E signed them, and I get why people like them. They're just dope. And again, original styles back in 1995. They could have easily just been the next group of we rapping about the streets cats, but they were very different, obviously. Uh Jealous One's Envy, Fat Joe. I'm not gonna hold you. I was not a Fat Joe the Gangster fan. I felt like he's not really nice like that. All he does is curse and threaten people. That's it. That's all I heard. Right? I know it's You Got a Flow, Joe, but it was just mad curses. And I was just like, I don't think he's saying anything beyond curses and threats. Till Jealous One's Envy. Heard that joint. I got the cassette somewhere back here. Heard that joint, and there's not a skip on this album. I think the album's perfect. It's one of Fat Joe's best. If you're going to say Fat Joe, or you're going to ask the question, does Fat Joe have a classic? I think he has two, and this is one of them. So now let's get into my top 5 hip hop albums from 1995 in order. Something that's very difficult for me to do, to be honest, but I'm going to keep them in order. At number 5, Goody Mob, Soul Food. Favorite tracks off of this album: Dirty South, Cell Therapy, and the title track, Soul Food. When I say originality in 1995, this is what I'm talking about, man. Even the songs I named, right? Dirty South, right? This is where we from. Beat is hard, the rhyming is hard on there. Big Boy performance is crazy on that song also. Then you have a song like Cell Therapy, which is dark and kind of like a southern boom bap feel to me, but extremely catchy. Who's that peeking in my window? Blow. Nobody now. Like, I remember when I saw the video, I was like, yo, this is hard. Like, this record is dope. And lastly, the title record, Soul Food. Anytime a rapper could say a heap of help in a fried chicken, macaroni and cheese, and collard greens, and beat, like, I'm in. Like, you literally made me hungry, like, saying that. But just a dope record, and the song is soulful. This album contains all of that energy from those 3 songs throughout, and I think is one of the more creative. I think in some ways it can be slept on because I think people are so enamored with Outkast that they miss Goody Mob standing right next to them when it comes to quality music coming out, that camp in Atlanta, and Organized Noise. So soulful, right? Number 4, Tupac, Me Against the World. Favorite songs: Temptations, Dear Mama, and the title track, Me Against the World. And I'm gonna say this: back then, title tracks were always good. Like, almost always, right? As soon as you got to the title track, you'd be like, okay, I see why they named it this. What I liked about Tupac and these different records is, and probably this is the main reason why I like Tupac, is because he made music that was so relatable, even if you wasn't necessarily going through what he was talking about. You felt it. You either knew somebody like that, or maybe you're discovering this situation through Tupac's lyrics. You know what I'm saying? His sincerity and the way he spit, like on Dear Mama, right? Like, this is his mama. This is his life. This is how he felt. And one line from Dear Mama that really struck a chord with me at this age, at this time in 1995, was, my anger wouldn't let me feel for a stranger, when he was talking about his father not being in his life. And I was dealing with the same thing. And I felt like I connected with Tupac, not just with that line, but that line really struck a chord with me because it's something you feel, but it took someone else to verbalize it, to say, yep, that's that's exactly how I was feeling. Number 3, Jizza, Liquid Swords. Liquid Swords. These are my top 3 songs off the album: Liquid Swords, Fourth Chamber, and Shadow Boxing. Liquid Swords, if you saw the Wu-Tang American Saga television show and how he was kind of like coming up with that hook, when I tell y'all that beat, they used to play this in the club. which is crazy because you're not really dancing with a shorty, but back then the women was into the bars just as much as the fellas. So you might just be rapping back when the MCs came, like you might be rapping back with shorty as you're kind of dancing with her. I guess that's what you're doing. Uh, but like that beat was crazy. And the way Jizza was flowing, it was like I felt like listening to Jizza, I was getting smarter, right? Like when you listen to Chuck D and like KRS-One, the teacher, KRS-One, right? You feel like an X Clan, shout out to X Clan. You feel like, oh, okay, I'm learning about myself as a black man. You know what I'm saying? Like they teaching me about this. With Jizza, you felt like, nah, this is intellectual rap. I feel like an intellectual, but it was boom bap, which was extra dope, right? Uh Obviously, Fourth Chamber. First time I heard Killer Priest on there, I was like, oh wow, this dude is dope. I judge wisely. If nothing ever surprised me, lounging between two pillars of ivory. Crazy, right? Ghostface on there. And then obviously with shadow boxing with Method Man. That beat is nuts. Like if you that beat gets you in before you hear a bar. And then Jizza and Method Man kill it. So there you have it. Number 2, Mobb Deep, the infamous favorite songs, Shook Ones Part 2, children. There's not one Shook Ones. There's actually there was a Part 1, but this Part 2 is the one you know. Uh Give Up the Goods and Right Back at You. Give Up the Goods featuring Big Noid, Right Back at You featuring Raekwon and Ghost. These are just records that just moved me instantly when I heard it. I remember the first time you know what's crazy? Real quick. The first time I heard Shook One's Part 2 wasn't because I saw the video. I think I read about it in the source and I went and bought the single. And the single contained Shook One's Part 1 and Shook One's Part 2. And this is before Infamous dropped. And I remember digging Shook One's Part 1. But to all the killers in the $100 billers, that buildup is iconic. To real, so ain't got no feelings, not feelings, feelings. That's what we say. You know what I'm saying? Got no feelings. I'm getting hyped, y'all. I'm gonna have to go listen to some of this. But Mobb Deep's The Infamous was such a turnaround from their debut album Juvenile Hell that it was a completely different group at that point in time. And honestly, coming off the back, I'm going to say pause because I know some of y'all can't take it. Off the shoulders or whatever you want to say of it. Maybe that's worse. All of it's worse. Of Nas's Illmatic coming out of Queensbridge, right? Like Nas's Illmatic was literally the return of Queensbridge based off of what happened in the battle with Boogie Down Productions with The Bridge Is Over. Now, sure, there were artists from QB that came out before them, but Illmatic kind of put all eyes on Queensbridge again. And for Nas to do what he did, and then for Mobb Deep to follow up with this album, it was like Queensbridge was back. Nas is in the Survival of the Fittest video. Like, it was a moment in time. It was the beginning of the Duns, you know what I'm saying? The Dun language and all that. So Mobb Deep's infamous album, dope assist from Q-Tip on the production side, helping out. Like song like Right Back at You, the way those drums hit is ridiculous. The way them drums hit on Give Up the Goods, Big Noise verse, like classic material, all in 1995, man. The freshman year, you know, we getting gifts, and this is not even all of them. And lastly, my number one, if you haven't guessed it already, Raekwon the Chef's Only Built for Cuban Links, aka Purple Tape, for the purple cassette that came with the album, that was the album back in the day. I even have the vinyl, which is purple vinyl. Classic album, top songs for me on this album: Knowledge God, Incarcerated Scarfaces, and Heaven and Hell. listen, we were not prepared for this album. I remember this album came out, I believe, in August, right? So I'm gearing up. I think the next week I'm getting ready to go to college, right? Nerves, uncertainty, but also optimistic about my future because I dreamed about that. I'm the second person in my family to graduate from college, but at this point in time, now I'm on that path to doing so, right? And this album comes out a week in advance, and when I say basically sunk into this album, I remember I was like packing or cleaning up or something like that, probably cleaning up my room, and I just put the joint on, and I just remember like as I'm doing things, I'm like, oh, this intro kind of sick. Oh, that song is crazy. Oh, that song is crazy. Oh, wait, Nas on here? Wait a minute. That's Shark by the Skit. They talk about Biggie. It was like, it was everything, right? It was such a mirror on 1995 at the time when you think about how big Wu-Tang became, and you had Jizza dropping an album, ODB dropped an album that year, and Method Man had dropped an album, and for the most part, like everything was a classic that was coming out. I'm not going to get into debate, Method Man album. I don't think it's a classic, but you know what I mean. Like there was just a lot going on, and then you have Nas from Illmatic, really like Nas being the first non-Wu member. I remember hearing on a Wu project, right? Because Method Man was on Biggie's album, but Biggie wasn't on Method Man's album. As far as rappers, and also everybody had a nickname now on this album. You know what I'm saying? From Iron Man and Noodles or whatever, Golden Arms and all that, Johnny Blaze. And this was the first time you saw Nas Escobar, which Nas actually mentioned on Mobb Deep's infamous album on a song called Eye for an Eye, where he says Nas Escobar moving on your weak production, right? So this was the Esco season before it was written, like building up. But to take it back to Raekwon featuring Ghostface Killah, where it wasn't like they were a group, even though it feels like a group album. This was Raekwon's debut, and it took on a mafioso kind of theme to it, and it was just dope, man. So there you have it. Those are my top 5 hip-hop albums from 1995. What's in your top 5? Leave your comments in the comment section wherever you get this. I know on Spotify now you can comment on stuff. I didn't know you could do that, but now you can. But also right here on YouTube, where we're trying to get to 500 subscribers. So if you enjoyed this trip down memory lane and you like the show and you checked out other episodes, subscribe to this podcast right here. And if you kind of not ready to commit in that way, I get it, but you still think it's dope, share it with people you know would enjoy this kind of content. Until next time, y'all, I'm not a critic, I'm a fan. Peace.